For today's LEGO City update, I first of all have to take apart the front section of my LEGO City. Before anything gets better, it first of all has to get worse. And what I'm starting off with right now is cutting a hole into the wooden platform of the city. I'm always quite careful when doing so because, well, all the sawdust then settles in the city in between the LEGO bricks, and this is honestly really annoying to get rid of. Therefore, I was vacuuming while sawing. And now having that done, I know some of you will get angry at me once again now because I have to cut base plates, and not in a straight line, but I have to cut out this rectangular shape in order to fit the size of the hole I've just cut for the underpass for the minifigures. My idea was to now finally connect the front section and the back section of the city and then allow the minifigures to cross the train tracks, which was otherwise impossible beforehand. Now what I'm doing next is cover up this hole I've just created and also add studs in order to build underneath the platform of the LEGO City, because that's where the staircase and the elevator shaft then lead to. And immediately, this is something you don't see every day in my LEGO City updates. I have to now build from underneath the LEGO City, and this is also why I'm now connecting the staircase. I've decided to use dark orange tiles in order to add a bit more contrast in between this dark bluish gray tiling I'm building for the rest of this front section right here. The elevator shaft I've decided to build in the exact same style as I've also designed it for the back side of the train tracks in order to make that really clear to the viewer that these two elevator shafts belong together. And then for the staircase leading underneath the city, I've decided to cover that up using a roof because I had more space available in front, and I thought this curved glass roof looked honestly a bit more interesting than simply having this open hole. Now we of course have another problem, because as a minifigure walking downstairs, well, you'd fall to certain death, and therefore this is now the new view if you walk towards this underpass as a minifigure. As you can see down here, I've added the underpass itself as well as the elevator shaft. I'll also of course show you how this looks from underneath the city at the end of the video. Then it was time to reassemble this front part of the city and then continue with the train tracks, because I now finally wanted to integrate the train tracks leading through the city into the rest of the city. On the other side of the train tracks, I've once again decided to add this same illegally built curved wall. I absolutely love this style. And next up, I added the ballast in between the sleepers of the train tracks, and in the middle of the train tracks, I was now thinking about either using a bit of a more dried up vegetation, maybe using reddish brown, tan colored plants. But honestly, when I was experimenting, I thought it looked much better having a bit more contrast and these vibrant green colors. And therefore, I've decided to add once again this lush green vegetation. Then last video, I've shown you that I've bought these printed flat tiles, for example, this electricity sign right here, which I thought was really fitting in between the train tracks. Then I, of course, had to exchange the cheese slopes to the cheese slopes, and this is probably now my favorite part of this LEGO City update, these lovely sheet music printed flat tiles I've now used in combination with two violin players in order to have these two street musicians right here at the marketplace, which I thought was really fitting. Now back to more structural work. If you remember, right here in front I want to add a tram line, and what I've now designed next is this end station for the tram line. The building itself has a quite similar design to this dark red Norwegian building I've designed for our money laundering story. And now I thought this would be interesting because I normally don't show these things. This is how I now try out how exactly I want to integrate new buildings into the city. I'm always using normal basic bricks in order to lay out the structure, and then afterwards, after having gained an idea of what I roughly want to build and where, for example, these walls will then be, I then start with a more detailed work. For example, right here where I've once again used these light bluish gray hinges in order to add another flower bed right here in front. I know at the moment I'm only using different shades of green, but I'll most likely also add a bit more color in this front area right here. Probably red flowers I was thinking about, but for now I simply wanted to get an idea of what the structure would look like right here in front. Also, I've decided to add a pine tree right next to the building in order to add a bit higher vegetation because the rest is quite flat. And then last but not least, because this is now the tram station, I of course have to add a bench to allow the minifigures to sit down while waiting for the tram to arrive. Behind the new building, I've now decided to add more bike stands because this is the part where you'd now probably leave your bike in order to then continue by foot onto the marketplace. Don't think you would continue riding the bike there, and therefore I've decided this is a nice area, also in combination with this underpass, to add more bike stands. Then in between the staircase and the elevator shaft, I've also decided to add garbage cans because that was missing and I needed to fill up this section, and this was honestly quite fitting. And having now worked on all these different details throughout the Lego City, I think it's time to take a look at a bit more structural work once again. Starting off with this new building right here at the end of the tram line, I of course once again built a detachable roof, so you can simply take that off. And as you can see, at the moment at least, there is no interior yet, but I'll of course, since it's this close to the front of the city, add an interior as soon as I know what's inside this building. And this would be my first question for you, what this building could be. Also, just to give you an idea what this space in front would look like, the entire tram line, of course, will be integrated into the tiling, not as I'm doing it right now, but with the 2 rails then remaining. And this would then open up this entire space and once again actually produce quite a large area we then have remaining in front of this building right here. Next up, when it comes to the stairs leading down underneath the Lego City as well as the elevator shaft, I mean, we don't have an elevator at the moment. It's just, as you can see, an empty shaft. But as soon as I'm adding the elevator itself, I'll also then add motorization and then probably have to extend the elevator shaft a bit on top in order to add wheels right here. And then when it comes to the motorization itself, I'll most likely add this underneath the platform. And this is actually, let me crawl down here. This is actually what it currently looks like down here. So not really spectacular, to be honest with you. But I think I don't really need to mention that for obvious reasons, I didn't connect this part with the other elevator on the other side of the train tracks because, well, that would have just simply been quite useless. Having now also finally completed this middle space in between the 2 train tracks right there, I can now start on the upper platform as well, because I was always using this space up here to build down here, which obviously was quite exhausting at some point, especially for my back. I honestly felt that after several hours of building. And now quickly to give you an idea what it looked like when I was building from up here, this is my sort of point of view perspective when I was building down here. This is the backside of what we've built today, especially relevant when we have trains with cameras mounted on them running for my train rides. And then I also need to show you one final thing, which is of course the before and after picture. First of all, this is what it looked like before, and now afterwards, of course, as it should be, there's quite a big difference you can see. Just to give you an idea of what the next updates are going to look like, first of all, I'm currently planning on how exactly I want to integrate the tram line into the city. Then I of course do not only want to continue in front of the city, but also we have this giant gap remaining in between the village and the city itself. I'm currently planning the tunnel in which the road is then going to disappear in the back of the city, and this should then of course also switch things up a bit. But what I'm currently obviously focusing on is finishing up this front section of the city, and then when I'm starting the upper platform of the city, this is then when I'm going to jump in between the village, the more rural area, and then the city itself, especially on the upper platform. So with that being said, that's it for today's Lego City update. I really hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you again in the next one.